Welcome back to Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small.
I'm Paul Ogden. So Mark, where are we coming from?
We're coming from the Indy Cigar Bar. It's located at 3357 East 86th Street on the north side of Indianapolis. It's right across from the Fashion Mall, Keystone Crossing. Our guests are Lindsay from Smoke-Free Marion County, and Abdul, attorney and political commentator, blogger.
Media whore, same difference.
Yes.
I think they might have websites they want to promote.
Yes. What's your website?
Our website is smokefreeindy.com. It's Smoke-Free Indy, Smoke-Free Marion County, kind of the same thing, but
I'm sorry.
It's all right. And all the information on the new ordinance, if you're a bar owner, business owner, any sort of questions on what's going to happen with the new ordinance, smokefreeindy.com.
And mine is indypolitics.org and indianabarrister.com.
Super. Paul, Lindsay, you were just finishing at the end of the first segment. You were talking about
patios.
Yes.
So if you're a patio, from now until July 1st, and the Indy ordinance goes into effect on June 1st, you can kind of smoke as close to the door as you want. But starting July 1st, the statewide law will go into effect, which will supersede the outdoor provisions of Indianapolis's ordinance, since we have none. So if you have a smoking outdoor area, it'll have to be 8 feet away from the door, and that starts July 1st.
Okay.
And that's the other thing to keep in mind too, is that we're kind of dealing with sort of a Venn diagram from law school. If you guys remember that from the stupid bar exam. Is you have the state ordinance over here, you have the city ordinance over here, and the state ordinance it allows cities to have more restrictive ordinances than the state law. But if it's an area that the city ordinance doesn't cover, then the state law sort of fills in the gap. So there are a couple of things in the city ordinance, like Lindsay just pointed out about the outdoor provision, that would kick in. But then there's the other provision about private clubs and hotels, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of people right now are trying to figure out where does the state ordinance begin and where does the city ordinance end.
There's really two main provisions where the state law will actually supersede the Indianapolis law, and that's in regards to the foot rule for distance to doorways and private clubs. The state provision for private clubs will be considered more restrictive than what the exemption for Indianapolis allows. So those will be the two main areas where the state will supersede Indianapolis.
In what way will the state be more restrictive in terms of private clubs?
So in Indianapolis, we basically said if you're a private club and you vote, to still allow smoking, anybody can come into your establishment at any time, as long as you're a guest of a member, including children. The state went a little bit further and said, if you're a private club and your members vote every 2 years and you allow children in, well, you can only allow them into those sections where smoking is not allowed, and it will require the club to basically build a section, with a door and a wall and a separate ventilation system that does not allow children into that area. So that's stronger than what Indianapolis did. So the private clubs in Indianapolis will have to abide by the state law and have some sort of area where children are not allowed and the smoke cannot, even though we know it still escapes when you open the doors, but they still want to be able to allow to have children in that area.
It doesn't necessarily.
Escapes.
No, it doesn't necessarily.
So that's filling in that.
Yeah, an air system can be built so that air does not escape when you open the door and walk out.
Even the people who make these ASHRAE, the systems of refrigerating, heating, and air, say that they cannot completely 100% clear the air to make it safe. So regardless, it's really more about that the clubs in Indianapolis will have to abide by the statewide ordinance, and they'll deal with it on that.
Okay.
I wanted to ask Lindsay about, we're talking about the smoking ban, but what medical studies have there been about secondhand smoke? I know that's a concern of yours.
Yeah, I guess the most comprehensive report came out in 2006, and that's the Surgeon General's report, which was really, it was before 2005 when Indianapolis passed an ordinance, so they really didn't have that evidence to go on. And it came up with 6 main conclusions, and some of the most important ones, which policy are based off of, is that there's no safe level of secondhand smoke. Ventilating the room does not work. Providing smoking and non-smoking sections does not work. And even brief exposure to secondhand smoke can be harmful and have immediate adverse health effects. That was really the first major report that came out that was a conglomerate of studies and meta-analysis of all these other studies.
There was a meta-analysis of the studies.
It took, yes, a lot of studies that had been done and finally combined it into one and came up with 6 major conclusions of the 2006 report. And then 2010 there was a recent study, and then there was even a report this year in 2012. So, but we really didn't have the 2006 would probably be like the main year where we finally could say, here's the scientific evidence.
Well, let's see, here's the thing. I don't doubt the science behind the dangers of secondhand smoking. It's not good for you. And my position has never been that smoking's healthy. I mean, first, but let's look at it from a broader perspective. Bars, by their very nature, it's the history of man, have sort of been central locations for us to exercise our vices. You go to a bar for one of 3 reasons. You go to drink, you go to smoke, or get lucky. One of those 3 things will kill you if you do it wrong.
Gambling?
That too, depending on the guy who's going to come up with a baseball bat and breaks your legs. But my position has been, from day one, is that this is not necessarily, this has been an issue that the free market, with a little bit of nudging from the government, can take care of. And the consumer, the worker, and the proprietor can make a conscious decision as to whether they want to be in a place that allows smoking or non-smoking. Which is why I've always liked the original ordinance that we did back in 2005, which is, okay, if you're gonna be a bar or tavern or open to the general public per se, then you make the call whether you want to be smoking or non-smoking. Put it on the door, disclose it, and unless Stevie Wonder is walking in, maybe you put it in Braille so you can feel, oh, this is a smoking establishment, I don't want to go in here. The consumer can make the decision. I mean, now, the argument that some of my anti-smoking friends will say is that, well, the government regulates businesses all the time. They regulate the temperature of the water, in the kitchen, for dishes, how we handle the food. And I agree wholeheartedly, because those are dangers that the consumer may not necessarily be able to see or witness for themselves until it's too late, after you've gotten sick and you've gone to the hospital for botulism. Unless my nose has been cut off, I can tell whether a place is smoking or non-smoking. And unless I went to IPS, I can probably read and see that the sign on the door says smoking or non-smoking. Then I, as a consumer, can make the choice. Does the government have a role to play in public health? I agree wholeheartedly. And I believe that if it's a place where you, as a consumer, do not have a choice, i.e. school, government building, bus stop, airplane, closed air stadium, then sure, banning smoking makes absolute perfect sense. I've never had a problem with that. For me, the issue's always been, there's a place where the consumer has a choice, that is where the government should stop, and then let the consumer or the worker or the bar owner go from there.
Yeah, and when you were saying a couple of minutes ago, you can relax outside with your cigarette and come back in, well, that's silly. I mean, it's not relaxing if I have to get up with a Churchill. I mean, I'm smoking Churchill. It takes an hour and a half to smoke a cigar. I'm not going to be relaxed standing outside with my drink inside.
Well, no one is forcing you to smoke, so that is a choice that you've made on your own, and that is a decision that you are making. And unfortunately, that decision that you make doesn't just affect you, which is the difference between eating a hamburger or salty foods. They say, what are we going to ban next? In these sorts of laws. You're going to tell me I can't eat a cheeseburger. You eating a cheeseburger, there's no such thing as secondhand fat.
Oh, no, but there is an impact to me. There is an impact to me negatively of people who develop heart disease from being obese. Obesity is leading killer in the country right now.
Tobacco-related death and disease is the number 1 killer.
I think
heart disease is contributed to tobacco use, but tobacco use is the number 1 cause of preventable death and disease in the United States.
And not stats according in 2010, but that aside, they're both way up there. Somebody who's eating a cheeseburger does affect my insurance rates.
But it doesn't affect your health.
It can affect my health because of the stress it puts on me because I'm working 7 days a week.
Before the health insurance.
Yeah, but going back to the notion of if it's my choice, those people have a choice of not going into bars where smoking is allowed. And from my experience of going into bars where smoking is allowed, a lot of the times the staff is there, they smoke. Bartending staff smokes. customers smoke, and people can choose not to go into there if they wish. And so why can't we have any bars that allow smoking?
It's unacceptable to have an environment that is so unhealthy, and just because, like Abdul said, that I should back up. As Abdul said, government regulates all sorts of establishments. If this establishment here wanted to serve dirty ice, should they be able to, because it's cheaper and while it's their business, and they should be able to do whatever they want inside their own establishment. We don't work that way, and especially the secondhand smoke in workplaces is not acceptable. I don't have to fly on a plane. Like, that's a choice. Do I have to go fly on a plane? Did I have to go to the Pacer game on Wednesday? No, but I still went into that establishment, and we have certain expectations that it's going to be a safe environment for not only those guests and patrons, but employees as well.
But I think to piggyback on Mark's point is, I think, lack of a better term, in real life we always tolerate a certain amount of risk. I mean, there's nothing that says that any of us, outside today, that parking lot is packed. Somebody barreling through, not paying attention, either one of us is gone. There's always a certain amount of risk.
And there are rules
and
laws that will protect you and I and that person.
Yeah, but the rules, but we've always been, at what point do we protect ourselves? And that's where I come from. To me, to go into a bar and complain about the secondhand smoke is like walking to a brothel and complain about the sexually transmitted disease if you're working for the Secret Service. I mean, you are in a brothel. This is the risk you take by going into...
Right, but you going into a brothel does not harm my health, whereas if you and I are both in a bar and someone is smoking and I'm not, that harms my health. If you go into a brothel and you get an STD, that's not going to affect me. If I'm just sitting there...
Or if you follow an policy of abstinence, because thanks to the 21st century and people a little bit older than us, we can't have sex anymore unless we're all wrapped in a hefty bag. Thank you all very much.
I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm a veteran of the war on drugs. And we won. Now, going back to the studies on secondhand smoke, though, that was a meta-study in 2010, and there were actually several studies on secondhand smoke, the methodology of which had been called into question, markedly called into question. There was the EPA study that was done in 1993. There was a study that was done in Helena, Montana, that was conducted by an Ohio State professor. That was in 2007, I think, or 2005. All these studies, one said that if you had 30 minutes, a non-smoker's exposure of 30 minutes to secondhand smoke would result in permanent consequences to their health. But when you go into the studies that were actually done, it was chronic exposure to acute levels of secondhand smoke. It was not, just secondhand smoke because somebody's coming out of a door.
And what do you mean by chronic exposure?
That would mean somebody with 2 hours or more every day for 5 days a week.
That sounds like a kid being exposed to smoke at home.
That's the next step, because your organization is not satisfied with the ordinance that was passed.
Well, I want to back up and say that even the tobacco industry documents show that secondhand smoke is harmful, and even they do not deny that secondhand smoke, even in brief exposure, is not harmful, and even Abdul admits it.
First of all, secondhand smoke is not. It's not good for you.
20 times the more amount of reputable studies. If you're going to deny the World Health Organization and Surgeon General.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I will deny the World Health Organization.
But you might want to deny that right after take a break, because I can keep an eye on your stopwatch.
Oh, thank you. And I'm really high tech on this. We'll be right back.